thank you very much, and nice to see so many that are coming today to Tróndur's defense. My name is Cornelia Jespers. I'm the chairperson of today's defense, and I would like to welcome our examination board, Dr. Anna Sandy, Institute of Marine Research in Norway, Dr. Alexander Moray from Marine Scotland Science, UK, and Professor Niels Lorentzen from DTU Aqua. I would of course like to welcome Tróndur. I remember this is a great day today. You have worked 3 years to achieve these results and to discuss it with this board today. And would also like to welcome Professor Ken Hansen-Kostrup, the main supervisor, as well as the two co-supervisors, Professor Andy Visser and Dr. Knudsen Sørensen from Simonsen from Fiskaling from Faroe Islands, probably pronounced in the wrong way. Today's procedures will be that Tróndur will give a lecture about lice management in salmon aquaculture using the Faroe Islands as a case site. This 45-minute presentation will then be followed by questions by the examination board. And before we do the hardcore examination, we'll have a 5-minute break. And during this 5 minutes, people from the auditorium who are interested to ask questions to me to announce that they would like to pose a question at the end. But I need to point out that it's only allowed a maximum of 15 minutes per person for questions. So we keep it strict to the schedule, and this defense is not allowed to take more than 3 hours in total. So with this kind of outline, I would like to give the floor to you. Tróndur, good luck, and we are looking forward to hear your talk today.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm Tróndur, and I'm gonna present my PhD project about lice management in salmon aquaculture, where we used Faroe Islands as a case site. This work was done in collaboration between DTU Aqua and Fiskaling, a Faroese aquaculture research station. So we can just start by getting a brief overview of our marine food sources. So in the last century, capture fisheries grew rapidly until the mid and late 1980s, where it hit around 90 million tons, and it really hasn't grown since. Global aquaculture, on the other hand, has grown from 5 million tons in the 1980s to just above 80 million tons in 2017. Global salmon aquaculture, on the other hand, is only a small fraction of this in production volume, but has seen a similar development where it grew from virtually nothing in 1980 to above 2.2 million tons in the last couple of years. And this represents a value of around 15 billion euros per year. So if you look at salmon aquaculture on a global map, we see that it's spread out over 5 continents, but the majority of production occurs in Northern Europe, where Norway is by far the largest nation, producing 1.2 million tons. Chile is second with 600,000 tons, UK is third with 200, and Canada has 120,000 tons. And Faroe Islands is actually the 5th largest producer with between 70 to 80,000 tons per year. So if you don't know it, I am from Faroe Islands, and if you're wondering why I'm so interested in salmon aquaculture and also sea lice aquaculture, you just have to look at production per capita, where Faroe Islands is by far the largest nation, producing 1.6 tons of Atlantic salmon per Faroese citizen. Compared to only Norway, which has 0.25. These numbers may be a bit amusing, but they also indicate that or how important salmon aquaculture is for the Faroese society, and it also represents half of the export value today in Faroe Islands. So what are salmon lice, and why are they a problem? Well, salmon lice, or Lepterius salmonis, is a naturally occurring ectoparasitic cocopod belonging to the family of Cartidea, and they're probably the most studied marine parasite in the world. And due to the recent growth of salmon aquaculture, the number and density of potential hosts has exploded, and this has naturally led to an increased number of salmon lice in the environment, causing problems both for wild and farmed salmonids. Sea lice damage their host by feeding on the muscus, skin and blood of their host, and this leads to secondary infections and osmoregulatory problems, leading to sickness and stress. And at really high lice numbers, the host can die directly from the damage caused by the lice. And here you see a badly bitten salmon which has clear open wounds. And if you can see, these brown dots here are all salmon lice, so they can be heavily infected by this parasite. So salmon farmers use treatments to control salmon lice and other sea lice. And it's estimated that on a global scale, the salmon aquaculture uses between 230 to 1 billion euros just to control the parasite. So if we just jump to the main questions, these are taken directly from the thesis. So the main question was, what are the optimal lice management strategies in salmon farm networks? And we had a secondary question of how can salmon lice growth be modeled in Faroe Islands? So if you really don't know what I'm asking in this question, so I'll try to explain it in other words. What I really want to do is to model salmon lice growth in a farm site throughout the production cycle. So here you see an example of Faroese farm site where they've counted gravid lice every 14 days for the whole production cycle. And so we want to make a model which somehow predicts the growth and fluctuations of lice development throughout the production cycle. And we want to do this only knowing when and which treatments occur. So these lines are treatment events. And also knowing when and how many salmon are in the farm site, indicated with this green line here. So if we manage to do this, we can use this to answer the questions of or identifying optimal lice management strategies. But to achieve the same, we need a model of salmon lice growth, like the mathematical model, which may look something like this when you plot it. And then we want a model of the physical environment to estimate lice dispersion. And here we wanted to use Faroe Islands as a case site. And there are several reasons for this. One is due to the Faroe Islands is relatively isolated due to its location in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And it has a relatively high number of salmon farms, indicated with these red areas here. Salinity in Faroe Islands is also very stable and constant at and high, which shouldn't affect the survivability of salmon lice. And third, the temperature does vary a bit annually, but the temperature around Faroe Islands is very uniform. So before we move on, we need to establish some basic biological background about salmon lice. So salmon lice hatch from the egg streams of adult females and hatch into the environment as Anopheles 1. They molt into Anopheles 2 and then to an infectious coccopodite. These three stages, first stages are planktonic and non-feeding, so they have a limited time to locate and infect a new host. And at 10 degrees water, this takes, or they can survive up to around 16 days. If they then manage to find and infect a new host, they will start feeding and molt into Calamus 1, and then to a Calamus 2, and these two stages are immobile. After that, they molt into a pre-adult 1, and then 2, and eventually to an adult male or female. And these three last stages are mobile, so they can move around the fish. And from the time that the larvae are attached to the fish until they can produce larvae on their own takes around roughly 50 days at 10 degrees water. So if we take our population dynamic glasses on and try to make a box model of this life cycle, we can make this relatively simple system here, where these first boxes here represent the pre-adult, now the 5 attached stages on the fish, and this 4th box here is of gravid females producing larvae. And the system is fairly stable, so now fairly simple. It's just either it's the lice or larvae on the fish or farm side are from internal production or from external sources. And for now, external sources means wild salmonids in the local environment giving this farm side lice. And then if we imagine we have an island with 3 farm sites represented with these 3 box models here, then due to water current and lice dispersion, we might have lice coming from farm 3 to farm 1 and farm 2 to farm 1. So now farm 1 will have an increased external infection pressure in addition to the natural background infection. So this relatively simple model here can be explained with these 5 equations here. So the first 3 are of the plankton, are the 5 attached stages on the fish, and the 4th here is of a gravid larvae producing female, and beta here is the amount of viable larvae at farm I, which is internal infection, which is these parameters here, plus the external infection or larvae from other farms, and plus a constant here which is natural background infection. So the reason I spent so much time on establishing this model already is because the 3 papers I'll go through now can all be coupled back to this model or slide. So in the first paper, I took this whole model, coupled it to an economic component, forced it with idealized condition, and investigated the treatment threshold. In the second paper, I tried to investigate this, so C parameter here, which is the connectivity between farms. In the third paper, I tried to estimate this L0 here, where I assumed in that period that this was 0, and I didn't know anything about that, so I actually put all this knowledge into a constant L0 here. And also I estimated the salmon lice population growth rate in the third paper. So the first paper is titled Optimal Salmon Lice Treatment in and Tragedy of the Commons in Salmon Farm Networks. And this was published in Aquaculture in 2019. So the main question in this paper was, what treatment threshold yields the highest profit? And I investigated this both in single or isolated farm and a connected farm network. So if you remember, I said that farmers control salmon lice with treatments, and in most salmon farming countries, authorities have legislated at which level farmers are obligated to treat their fish for sea lice. And for example, this threshold is in Norway 0.2 to 0.5 gravid lice per salmon. It's currently in Faroe Islands is currently 1.5 gravid lice per salmon, and as far as I could read, it's 8 adult females per salmon in Scotland, but they do have a code of good conduct which recommends a far lower treatment threshold. And then we had a secondary or sub question, which was, is there a case of tragedy of the commons in salmon farm networks? And if you don't remember what tragedy of the commons is, it can be explained by the 4 sheep herders which share a common grass field. And if we say that sheep herders have 100 sheep on the grass field each, and this is the carrying capacity of the grass field, then if one farmer decides to put 10 extra sheep onto the grass field, he will increase his own profit while the profit of the other farmers will decrease. If then they all decide to put 10 extra sheep onto the grass field, it turns out that they will all eventually lose a profit. So to answer these questions, I decided to make a conceptual bioeconomic model, which was just an economic model coupled to a combined salmon growth and salmon lice model. And essentially this model calculates profit per time with this equation here, where This part here is just the profit of harvest, and this part here is just the cost of doing treatments. And then I used the salmon growth model to calculate the salmon weight and salmon survival, and also the time of harvest. And I used the salmon lice model to calculate the number of treatments and also the time of treatments. And in here also I set the treatment threshold. And so yeah, we talked about the salmon lice model. The salmon growth model was one complementary growth equation where we added an extra parameter, which was cost of having lice. And salmon survival was just very simple with constant mortality through time. So we added two extra parameters in this model. One was the cost of having lice, and it should be understood in that way. So if you have no lice, you will grow 100% of what you can grow, and in our model settings with 20 lice, you grow 50% of what you can grow. And with lice numbers above 40 gravid lice per salmon, which is, I guess, a lot, the salmon don't grow at all. I didn't have the stomach to kill the salmon in the model, so I just said they didn't grow. And then we also added an Lee effect, or a mate limitation effect, proposed by Storman and Kroschak, which says that at really low lice numbers, the probability of a male and female finding each other is low, and therefore female aren't fertilized all the time, and therefore the average larvae production rate is low. But as soon as gravid females go above around 2 gravid lice per salmon, females will have almost 100% fertilization, she says. So to give you insight into how a model simulation works, I will take you through one simulation of one farm site and one production cycle. So here you see the growth of the different stages of the salmon. Here you see the growth of salmon in kilos, and here you see salmon survivability. And if we start with one calamus, it will die off and then molt into a pre-adult female. So now we only follow females, therefore it decreases 50%, and that will become an adult female, and then eventually a gravid larvae producing female. And they put larvae out into the environment, and after 10 days in the water, they will start resettling on the farm site. And you see the growth there. And this cycle continues until, in this simulation, gravid females reach 2 gravid lice per salmon, and we set that as a treatment threshold in the simulation, and 95% of all the stages on the salmon, or lice stages on the salmon, die off. And this is a fairly effective treatment. And the salmon stop growing for 10 days, as well as 0.5% of salmon die when we do a treatment. You may also notice that calamus stage goes up right after doing a treatment. And that's because we don't kill the larvae which are floating in the environment, so they're free to settle on the farm site right after the treatment. And that, so the cycle also continues here, and again we have a peak in gravid females, or gravid lice, but we don't hit another threshold, and we set in our simulations that when the salmon become 5 kilo, we will harvest. So here, all the fish are just taken out of the sea. So if we move on to the results, so we tested several farm systems in a 5x5 farm network. We had isolated farms, so it wasn't connected to any other farms. We had directional non-cyclic, which can be seen as farms in a fjord where the current goes out in the upper layers. So the first one infects the second one, and the last one doesn't infect any other farm. And we have these 3 symmetric systems here, where equal is just equal connectivity between all the farms. And then we have diffusive, which is where the connectivity decreases with distance from the farm. And directional cyclic, which can be seen as an island where the water currents goes around one direction, and the first one infects the second one, and the last one infects the first one. So if we look at the results, here's treatment per farm per cycle, and here we have profit as euro per salmon per year. We see that isolated farms have by far the highest profit. Directional non-cyclic have a little bit lower profit, and these symmetric systems here have the lowest profit, and they have very similar results or dynamics. So from now on, I will just show the results from equal connectivity and isolated farm systems. So this slide sums up the main results in paper 1. So again, we have profit on the y-axis, and then the treatment threshold as on a logarithmic scale here on the x-axis. And we see that when there is connectivity between farms, we see a clear optimal treatment threshold, which is on a fairly low level. So in this case here, it's between 0.01 to 0.1. But if you have an isolated farm, you have a treatment threshold regarding profit at a much higher level. So here between 5 to 10 gravid lice per salmon. And in this simulation, we tested with a 60% treatment efficiency, and it's really clear in this simulation. So we did another simulation where, again, with an equal connectivity matrix, where we tested different external or constant external infection pressures. So the blue is 1 lice per 1,000 days, the red is 1 lice per 100 days, and this is 1 lice per 10 days. So we can clearly see the optimal treatment threshold regarding profit at a really low level, but as external infection pressure increases, this sort of optimal peak is pushed to the right and also flattens out. So we only have this optimal threshold peak if the constant external infection pressure. So that's the external pressure that you can't do anything about. When that is sufficiently low, you can see this optimal peak here. And so for the tragedy of the commons experiment simulation, so here we again have profit on the y-axis, and we have proportion of cheating farms on the x-axis. And we had tested again a 5x5 farm network with equal connectivity. And we said that, okay, authorities say that all the farmers have to treat their fish when the lice go above 0.1 gravid lice per salmon. But then we looked at, okay, if one farmer, 2, 3, 4, or all farmers said, okay, we'll drop this legislation and use a 10 gravid lice per salmon treatment threshold. And then you see here that if one farmer cheats, he gets increased profit, but the profit of the whole system goes considerably down. And this goes on as more farmers cheat, but the profit for each cheating farmer decreases as more farmers cheat. And one not so trivial result here is that the system is least profitable when about half of the farmers are cheating. So this indicates that if you manage a farm system with a low treatment threshold, you either have to have strict regulation or very high compliance, or you may consider just dropping regulation and putting on a treatment threshold which every farmer can follow if you think of profit of the entire system. So until now we have assumed idealized connectivity, but how is connectivity in a real system? So in paper 2, we had, which was titled Identifying Salmon Lice Transmission Characteristics Between Various Salmon Farms. This was published in Aquaculture Environment Interactions. And the main aim in this paper was to estimate the C parameter from the model, which was how many lice go from one farm site to another, so connectivity. And for this we used a dispersal model where we had hydrodynamic data which solely was based on tidal currents, forcing a particle tracking model with Lagrangian motion, and where we assigned particles with biological parameters such as the length of the planktonic phases, and also the mortality was set to a constant of 17% per day, which is fairly normal in these kinds of lice models. The connectivity matrix was defined by where we defined 24 farm sites, And the emitting area here, the white squares here, is where we released the lice or particles. And the receiving area is this blue area here. The reason for the difference between these two is because our model didn't resolve fjord circulation, and therefore we decided, so if a lice enters a fjord where a farm is located, it's considered infectious and therefore recorded. And this gave us a bit of problems later, but we'll talk about that. So in the connectivity simulations, we released 900 particles every hour for 83 days. And particles were allowed to live out their entire planktonic lifespan. And we only recorded a particle once in a specific farm site. And of course, we only recorded infectious cockpodites. So in our case, we had 10 degrees, so particles that were older than 4 days. So to make you understand a simulation like this a bit better, I've released 16 particles from all the farm sites in Faroe Islands and colored them depending on where Faroe Islands they're released. And you can notice right away that in several farms, particles disperse far and wide right after they are released. But in other farm sites, particles tend to stay very put. And this is due to that the tide currents don't resolve the estuarine or fjord circulation. And we also may notice that particles in general or in mean disperse clockwise around the main islands and in the southernmost island. And we see that particles from the southernmost island don't disperse that much up into the rest of the Faroe Islands. And particles coming from the north farms disperse east and south of the southernmost island before they can enter the farm on the east side here. So this is good, of course, good knowledge. And so this movie should give you an indication of that, it looks like the Faroe Islands is submerged in a soup of salmon lice, which may, to some degree, be true also. So if we look at the conductivity results, so these results here contain a lot of information, so I won't go to that in detail here. But we have receiving farms on the y-axis and emitting farms on the x-axis. And this plot here, we have the percentage of particles or lice going from one farm site to another. And in this middle plot here, we have the mean age of those particles going from one farm site to another. And this third plot here, I took information from these two and incorporated mortality. So this is the percentage of particles going from one farm site to another when mortality is included. So in general, we can say that the Faroe Islands form a complex and highly connected farm network. And we can identify at least 2 clusters of farms. So we have the southernmost island 1, 2, and 3, which is not connected to other farms in Faroe Islands in our simulations. And the second cluster is, for now, the rest of the farms in Faroe Islands. We could also categorize farmers as emitters and receivers. And so emitters is how many lice farms give to other farms in Faroe Islands, and receivers is how many lice they get from other farms in Faroe Islands. And we see that the highest emitters are 18 and 16, which are located in this strait here. And the highest receiver is farm 15, also in this strait here. And if you remember the movie, there are a lot of particles going back and forth in this strait here. And each time they pass this farm 15, then sort of make a vortex or whirl into the fjord, into this blue area here. So that partly also explains why 15 is such a high receiver. And also the receiving area of 15 is also quite large. But we also have farm 9 and 5, which are located here, which are number 2 and 3 receivers. So these are very exposed areas where a lot of water goes through those areas. So it makes sense that they are among the highest receivers. So what happens if we take this connectivity estimates directly and put it into our salmon lice model? So here we took farm 1, 2, and 3, so the southernmost island, which seemingly is isolated, and we took all the data we had from 13 to 19, 2013 to 2019, such as the number of salmon, which is this green line here, and the salmon lice count in this period, which is this red line here. And if we just run this model directly with this connectivity result, it does very badly. You see that we have a highly overestimation of lice growth in all these farms. And there are, I think, two main reasons for this. One is the receiving area we had, which was very large in places and in the whole fjord. And so we might, or we definitely do overestimate the connectivity between two farms. But also we have a problem in the way the connectivity is defined in the model currently. So when we put one, or if we down here and we just put one salmon into a farm site, in the models as it is now, it will receive as many lice as if we had put 1 million salmon into the farm site. And this, of course, is a problem we need to attend to. So now we have estimated connectivity based on biophysical models and particle type models. But can connectivity be estimated maybe indirectly or by other means? Well, in paper 3 we looked at, or was titled Estimation of Viral Rates of Salmon Lice Infections in Faroe Islands. And so here, all the results we have are based on the Faroese lice data, where fiscaling actually since 2009 and regularly maybe since 2011 has gone out to all the active farm sites in Faroe Islands and counted lice every 14 days. And before 2016 they counted 10 salmon from each farm, and after 2016 they counted 10 salmon from each sea cage in a farm site. And so here we see a very experienced counter from fiscaling looking for lice on a salmon out on a salmon farm. And when they count the Calvin stage, which are called immobile, and they count the pre-adult 1 and 2 and adult males, which they call mobile or mobile lice, and they have a separate group for adult females, which they call gravid female. And we decided to look away from this data here, partly because lice are very small at this stage and hard to count. And also in this stage you don't distinguish between other sea lice species. So, and there are some other species that occasionally cause troubles in salmon farms, at least in the northern hemisphere. So yeah, we disregarded information from that, those counts. So if we take all this data and calculate or estimate how many, or the total amount of gravid lice in Faroe Islands, and also total amount of mobile lice from the period 11 to end of 2018. First of all, you see here the green line is the number of salmon, which has been extremely or fairly stable at 20 million salmon in Faroese waters in this whole period. And the black line here showing gravid females fluctuates a lot in this period, and it tends to be highest in winter time within a year. And it goes from really low numbers all the way up to around 35 million gravid lice around in Faroe Islands. So the aim of this paper was to estimate the external infection pressure, so the L0 here, and also the salmon lice population growth rate we wanted to estimate, and we reasoned from this rather long equation here. So to find the external infection pressure, we assume that the first 150 days that Q and or S is 0. So we look at breed again, so I renamed the C to Q here because I added it with some other parameters, but never mind. So just think of this as C. So we don't have any connectivity, or we have the mate limitation effect kicking in. So this whole part is 0 the first 150 days, or that's what we assume. And and so if we use the equation in the salmon lice model and rearrange them a bit and call and put row 1, 2, and 3 to get row 2, 3, and 4 together, we call it PM, and this corresponds to when we add gravid lice and mobile lice together and get this total green dots here. So we can use this equation, so we may estimate L0 for each salmon lice count the first 150 days, and then from here we can make an average over the external infection pressure at the farm site. So we see the results here from the 30 farms we looked at. We see that it goes from really low numbers to around 0.1 lice per salmon per day. And we also were a bit unsure if 150 days were maybe a too long period to estimate the internal production to be 0. So we looked at, okay, if we only include the first 75 days, or 100 days, or 125 days. And we see that it does change the estimate somewhat, but sometimes it goes down and sometimes it goes up. And overall, it doesn't significantly affect the external infection pressure estimates. So another way of looking at external infection pressure is by, this is a lot of plots, but each representing one of the 30 farms we looked at. But again, here we have external infection pressure on the y-axis, and we have total gravid lice here on the x-axis. So what you can take from this, so each of these blue circles is external infection pressure estimate from a production cycle on a farm site. So in essence, these whole plots say that the more of the higher the number of total gravid lice is in Faroe Islands, the higher external infection pressure you see on a farm. So this also makes sense when you think of how connected the various farms are. We also estimate the salmon lice population growth rate, which varies from around 1.8% per day up to above 5% per day. And it does significantly differ between farm sites in Faroe Islands. And for example, these 3 low farm sites or growth rates here are from farm sites which are in very exposed areas where we assume the internal or self-infection is fairly low. So we expect also the growth rate to be low in these farms. So that is of course good for the results. Okay, if we then take again the same simulation that we did before, now with the parameters we estimated in paper 3, we get a much better simulation. Well, it couldn't be much worse before, but we got a much better simulation, and at least we see some of the dynamics within several farm cycle or production cycles captured now in this simulation. It's far from perfect, but it does show that this modeling approach may have show some promise. And there are several reasons for this. One is that here actually we don't have any real connectivity between farms. The connectivity is put into the external infection pressures, which are constant and differentiate now between farms. And also we adjusted the self-connectivity to mimic the self or the salmon lice population growth rate that we estimated. So if we move to the conclusions, we found that isolated farms are most profitable at relatively high treatment thresholds. And farm networks are most profitable at relatively low treatment thresholds. We also saw that tragedy of the commons is present in connected salmon farm networks with overlapping production, and this indicates that we need strict regulations. We also saw that Faroese farms are highly connected and form a complex network, and we can categorize farmers as emitters and receivers. And we saw that there are at least 2 clusters of farms in Faroe Islands, which may indicate that we can have differentiate between management strategies in the different clusters. Last we also found that external infection pressure varies between Faroese farms, and it increases with the total amount of gravid lice that are in Faroe Islands. And salmon lice growth rate also varies significantly between Faroese farms. And this is maybe a bit trivial, but you think of Faroe Islands as such a small, but it varies extremely where the farms are placed, also just in Faroe Islands. So that's, of course, important information. So if we look at some perspective, we should improve our connectivity estimates. And one obvious thing is to include estuarine circulation. And as I talked with Knut a lot of times, this is not a trivial task. It requires a complex hydrodynamic models, including wind and precipitation forcing. But this work is on the way, but that is a very important thing to establish to improve the model. And we also have to have standardized receiving areas, so we shouldn't have different sizes of receiving areas. And we should also improve the estimates of treatment efficiency. So until now, I've just looked at the literature and then said, okay, this treatment type has this efficiency. And I use this efficiency throughout time and also between all farms, even though we know that treatments or lice develop resistance to treatments, and it depends on the farming crew, how they perform a treatment. So we could maybe develop an optimization algorithm which is better at guessing how effective a treatment is in the model. And cleaner fish we have not talked about, but most farms in Faroe Islands and also in Northern Europe use cleaner fish of some sort. But we have not gotten our hands on this data yet. But this is an important parameter to take into the model as we move on. And then we should have an increased understanding of the planktonic mortality. So until now, most models have just used as 70% to 24% mortality, and it's based on very, I would say, limited scientific data. So if we could increase our understanding of the mortality, this could affect also the connectivity estimates between farms. And also, as I said, we need to deal with the current way connectivity is defined. So we can't have that one poor salmon gets as many lice as if you put 1 million salmon into the farm. So we need to fix that. And also we need better and more frequent, or it would be nice if we got better and more frequent lice data, and maybe we will have automatic counting in the future. I know they're working in Norway a lot on this, which would increase frequency and also standardize data. So all in all, I think our modeling approach shows promise. We're far from reaching our goal, but if we could manage to get a model that models the salmon lice growth sufficiently, we could add confidence into this modeling approach and therefore use it to identify optimal salmon lice treatment management strategies. And that was it. Thank you, and of course I'll thank Innovationsfonden and Granskar Rai for funding my PhD. Yeah.
So does the examination board have urgent clarifying questions for the presentation right now? Good. So we would like to have a 5-minute break, and if there are questions ex auditorio, please come to me and I will note down your requests. Thank you. We see you back in 5 minutes.